I had a good time with it. So Thor Love and Thunder sees Thor teaming up with the new Thor, Jane Foster, as well as Valkyrie and Korg to take down Gore the God Butcher. And I was quite a bit worried going into this movie because the early reviews that I was seeing were very mixed, very divisive. A lot of people were coming out saying it is a ton of fun, one of the best MCU movies, a total blast from start to finish, very entertaining, very funny, a lot of heart, a lot of emotion, and a great villain. A lot of people came out saying that they went way too far with the humor and it became a parody of itself and it undercut the stakes and the emotional weight. So I came in a bit skeptical and I ended up falling somewhere in the middle. So I'm going to do two different parts here for this video. One is going to be the spoiler-free section where I quickly talk about my spoiler-free thoughts without getting into specifics. Then I'm also going to do a spoiler-filled section where I talk about my spoiler-filled thoughts. So I'm going to start with my spoiler-free thoughts and I'll start off with the characters. Starting with Thor. I really love Thor. He's one of my favorite MCU characters, and I enjoyed the hell out of him in this movie. A lot of people took issue with the direction they're taking his character, saying that they don't like he's become a doofus and a dumbass and just comic relief. I take it as a natural progression of his character, and at the end of Endgame, he's like, I want to be who I am as opposed to who I'm supposed to be. So I took it as him just being his true self finally and enjoying himself and having a good time and goofing around and also kicking ass. So to me, it felt like Thor just being his true self, so it worked for me. Jane Foster, I also thought was really good in this movie. Aside from certain aspects of her character that were a little bit underdeveloped and certain things I wish could have used a little bit of a better explanation, which I'll get to in my spoiler-filled section. Other than that, she was great. By far the best Jane Foster has ever been in the MCU. Total badass, and I loved her and Thor's relationship. Finally, in the first two Thor movies, it was not very good. They had no chemistry. The chemistry was there in this one, and their relationship was very much the emotional core of this movie. I really, really enjoyed that, which again, I'll talk about more in my spoiler-filled section, but I was glad to see that Jane Foster was done right in this movie, and her relationship with Thor really, really worked. Valkyrie was awesome, again, as always. We could have used maybe a little bit more of her, a little bit more development, but I love Valkyrie. She is super sexy and badass. One of my favorite MCU characters. I like how they touched on her sexuality in this movie, and I can't wait to see what they do with that in the future. Korg is super funny, as always, and I kind of like... Also, they dug a little bit deeper into him and his species and how everything works, and I'll get more into that in my spoiler-filled section as well, but I like what they did with Korg. Now, on to the villain, Gore the God Butcher. I thought Christian Bale was phenomenal in this movie. Now, he certainly doesn't quite fit in with the tone at times because the tone's a little bit too light, but the performance was phenomenal, and he's easily a top 10 MCU movie. Kind of like certain aspects of Jane, he was slightly underdeveloped. I wish they could have used just maybe add 15 to 20 minutes onto the movie. They could have fleshed him out just a little bit more, but Bale's performance was incredible. Super sinister, super scary, super threatening. I would definitely say a top 10 MCU villains. Could be top 5. He was fleshed out just a little bit more, but the look of him, the performance, the voice, it was all done very well. And he is also a very sympathetic villain to where you completely understand where he's coming from, and they give him a very sympathetic backstory, which I'll touch on more in my spoiler-filled section as well. But I thought Gore the God Butcher was very, very good, just slightly underdeveloped. The movie also looks great. Similar to Ragnarok, the visuals are amazing. The colors are super bright and vibrant and pretty to look at. There's some very cool and unique and inventive action in here. It is a absolute treat to look at this movie throughout the entire runtime, so that is a plus as well. Now I want to talk about the humor, which is one of the biggest issues a lot of people had with this movie, saying it goes way too far with the humor, that it goes into parody territory, that it took them out of the movie, and that it didn't have any stakes and the emotional moments didn't land because the tone was so light and comedic. I don't really agree. I certainly think there are certain times where the movie goes a little bit too goofy, but I thought for the most part it worked, and I felt like the natural progression of this character in this franchise, given what we saw in Thor Ragnarok, and also felt pretty similar to Guardians, and I love that vibe. This is something that we've seen in the MCU quite a few times. These types of movies I tend to have a lot of fun with. Does this one take it a little bit too far? On occasion, yes. The screaming goat joke gets a little bit too old, but then they put it on the back burner for a while and then bring it back and it's funny again. That's how you do recurring jokes. You don't do them over and over and over and beat you over the head with it. You put it on the back burner for a while and then make people forget about it and bring it back later, and then it's funny again. That's what I thought they did well with the goat stuff. Once they went away with it for a while and then came back to it, I thought it was funny. Most of the humor landed for me, and I got a ton of laughs in the theater. A lot of people are saying, oh, nobody laughed at this movie. The theater was dead silent. Not for me. People were laughing their asses off throughout this movie, and I was certainly one of them. Another thing I want to talk about is the heart and the emotional beats in this movie. I thought this movie had a ton of heart, and the emotional beats really landed for me. Again, a lot of people complain that the movie was too light in tone, that it undercut the emotional moments. Not for me. I really thought they all landed, and Thor has a good character arc in this movie, and then what happens with him and Jane and their relationship, which I'll touch on more in my spoiler-filled section. But I really thought the emotional moments landed, and they didn't feel undercut at all to me. And the movie had a surprising amount of heart. I thought it was just going to be all humor and all goofy, but no, I teared up several times throughout this movie. I don't know if for some reason it landed for a lot of people, but for me, they landed. And aside from the couple things I've talked about so far, I have one massive issue with this movie, and that is the huge plot conveniences and contrivances and certain things that we have never heard of before and never seen before. Like, this would have been very useful for a character to use this, like this ability. If this character has this ability, it would have been very useful for them to use this before. And that happens on several occasions, and that really takes you out of it and fucks up continuity, and you're like, why have we never heard this before? Why are they adding these new abilities? So that really annoyed me, and it was by far and away my biggest problem with the movie. But that being said, that is pretty much all I want to say spoiler-free. I'm going to talk more in the spoiler-filled section in a bit. But I had a good time with this movie. I had some issues with it, but I thought it was fun, mid-tier MCU movie. Certainly not one of the best MCU movies. It is firmly in the bottom half of my MCU movies, but I thought it was a lot of fun. Not as good as Ragnarok, but I would certainly watch it again several times, and I'm going to give Thor Love and Thunder a 7 out of 10. And now onto the spoiler-filled section of my review. This is not going to be a beat-by-beat summary of the plot. It's going to be just specific things I wanted to talk about, but couldn't talk about in my spoiler-free section of the review. It's going to be a little more casual, a little more free-form, a little more off-the-cuff, not as formal and tightly edited as my spoiler-free section. So, that being said, the first thing I want to talk about is Jane Foster. I talked about in my spoiler-free section how certain aspects of her character felt rushed to me and felt underdeveloped, and the explanations for certain things didn't really work for me. The explanation for how she becomes Thor, I thought was very weak. Basically, while Thor and her were dating, Thor whispers to Mjolnir, and he's like, don't ever stop taking care of her, please always watch over her. Like, that is literally all the explanation we get for how she becomes Thor. That was very weak to me. It felt like lazy writing. I wish they would have come up with a better explanation for that. And aside from that, just the whole cancer plotline was a bit rushed to me. So that aspect of her character was underdeveloped, and I wish they'd have fleshed that out over maybe another movie, or maybe made this movie a little bit longer. But the rest of her character I thought was great. The performance by Natalie Portman was phenomenal. She had more life in this one than she did in the other MCU movies. Her chemistry with Thor was off the charts. Way, way better than the first two Thor movies. And then her death at the end really, really hit and tugged at the heartstrings. And it felt like also a natural progression of the character. It was very predictable. I knew that's where they were going, when the hospital scene, when Thor's talking to her, and he's like, you gotta survive. And she's like, I'd rather do the right thing and live in the moment and save people than just lay here in this hospital bed and survive a little bit longer. So, based on that conversation, it was pretty easy to figure out where it's going. It's like, yeah, she's going to save Thor, then end up dying. So it was very predictable, but it was also, in my opinion, the correct way to take her character in this story. And her death really hit hard. And then getting Valhalla at the end really took the heartstrings as well. So I thought all that was really well done. To kind of continue with her relationship with Thor, and then talk about the Thor side of it, Thor, I thought, had a really good character arc in this movie. And like I talked about in my spoiler-free section, I had no problem with him acting like this. It seems like the natural progression, him just being himself. But he also has more room to grow. And I like how, even though the Guardians are barely in the movie, which is understandable. I mean, they did, in the trailers, they made it seem like they were going to be more prominent in the movie than they actually were. They were only in like the first 15 minutes because obviously at the end of Endgame, Thor teamed up with them and they had to find a way to get them apart. So they started with them together and then went their separate ways. But they didn't have absolutely nothing to do. There's a good conversation that Quill and Thor have before they go their separate ways, where Quill basically tells Thor, he's like, hey, in his own way, he gives the classic line of, it's better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all. And Thor really carries that with him throughout the rest of the movie, and it comes up several times throughout the movie. So that was nice, that a line that Quill said really had resonance throughout the entire movie. And Thor even says to Jane, in a funny but also heartfelt moment, he's like, I want to feel shitty about you. And then she's like, what? He's like, yeah, I'd rather, love and lose than to not feel anything. I'm going to open up again. So I thought that was a theme throughout the entire movie with Thor, and I thought that was really well done and a good arc for him. And by the end, he ends up losing Jane after opening up to her again, and he handles it pretty well. And he ends up taking care of this girl who actually is Gorr's daughter, which kind of is a nice, segue to the next thing I want to talk about, which is Gorr and his daughter and some of my issues with some of the conveniences. I'll kind of talk about all these things together. But Thor taking care of the daughter I thought was really nice at the end of the movie. I really liked her in the couple minutes of screen time that she had. I thought she was really charming and likable and funny, and can't wait to see her again. A lot of people didn't like that at the end of the movie where they left Thor off taking care of this girl and fighting bad guys. I thought it was cool, and I want to see where they go with it. But, Gorr, talking about Gorr and his daughter, she dies in the beginning of the movie, and it's a very, very heartbreaking, emotional moment. And then he finds the god. He's like, I've been loyal to you this whole time. Do I get my eternal reward? And the god's like, reward? No. Then he gets this sword that kills gods and then kills that god. To kind of go on a little bit of a tangent for a second, a lot of people complained that that god was too goofy and comedic and over the top, as well as Zeus. I thought that worked for what this movie was trying to do and what they're trying to tell you about gods. They're not what we think they are. They're not these beings that care about everyone and are always trying to help people and make sure there's no suffering. They live in their ivory towers and they enjoy their luxurious lives, and they're super narcissistic and don't really care about anyone, and they're really selfish. So given that, what the movie was saying that about the gods, I thought both the performance of the god in the beginning and the performance of Zeus fit very well within this movie. And it was clearly deliberate what they were trying to tell us about gods. So that worked for me. And then just to continue with Zeus, we thought that Thor killed him. Ends up he's still alive. And then we get the mid-credit scene with him and his son Hercules, played by none other than, he's here, he's there, he's every fucking where. It's Roy Kent from Ted Lasso. And me and my parents were the only people that reacted, who cheered when we saw him on screen. It's like, why the hell? I mean, there was a full theater. Does nobody else watch Ted Lasso? What the hell, guys? Get on that. Come on. That was very disappointing, but I digress. It's really fun to see him, and I can't wait to see what they do with that character in the future. So, to just kind of go back to what I was talking about before, Gorr, and then killing the god, and then his arc in the movie. Christian Bale was super, super scary, super menacing. Maybe a little bit too dark for the rest of the movie, but I don't know. It worked for me. Again, like I said, could have used just a little bit more fleshing out, maybe add 15 to 20 minutes onto the screen time to flesh Gorr a little bit more to make him an absolute top-tier MCU movie. Right now, I'd probably firmly place him in the top 10, mainly because of Bale's performance and the look of the character. Definitely one of the scariest MCU characters yet, and it was a serious threat to the heroes as well. They had to, go through a lot of shit to be able to kill him. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about was, which also is related to Gorr and his daughter, is the conveniences and issues and things that contrivances, how have we never heard of this before, that I talked about earlier in my spoiler-free section. One of them being the Eternity, I believe it's called, which is what Gorr was seeking throughout this entire movie and finds it at the end, which basically you get one wish and you get to wish anything and it comes true. And he wishes for his daughter to come back as he's dying instead of all gods to die. And then it's also while Jane is dying, and Thor ends up taking care of the girl. So the emotions of that scene hit well. But the idea of the Eternity itself was a pretty massive problem to me. I'm like, how have we never heard of this thing before? That feels very, very weird to me. There are so many times throughout the past in the MCU where someone could have used this. Thor knew about it. Why didn't he tell the Avengers after Thanos snapped away half of all life? Why didn't he say, hey, let's just go to this Eternity thing and wish all those people back? Why didn't Thanos? I'm sure Thanos knew about it. Why didn't he go to the eternity and wish half of all life to be eliminated? That creates a pretty big problem, pretty big continuity problem. And another one is the idea that Thor can just give people his powers easily, just by enchanting like anything. Like in the third act, earlier in the third act, he gives his powers to all of these kids, granted for a limited amount of time, which is a funny joke. He's like, for a limited amount of time. I thought that was pretty funny. But the idea of that is like, why has he never done this before? There are so many times throughout the history of the MCU where this would have been super useful for him to give his abilities to the Avengers or to his fellow Asgardians or whatever. How have we never seen this before? And people will say, well, it's because of the lightning bolt that he could do that. Okay, but he had the lightning bolt on the scene on the moon where it's all black and white, which, by the way, definitely the best part of the movie. That looked really, really cool, and Gore was extra scary there. The action was really good, but he had the lightning bolt at that time, so why didn't he use it there? And also, why didn't he go get the lightning bolt to stop Thanos instead of building Stormbreaker? So these kinds of things create so many continuity issues, and that was by far and away my biggest problem with the movie. Just to talk about a few more things. I like how they delve a little bit more into Korg and his species, and how in his species, basically you have to hold hands with someone for a month, and then boom, a kid is born. So I like the story told about that. And then the guy he ends up with at the end, I think his name was Chet, he had a mustache. I thought that was really funny. And then Valkyrie, I liked how they explored her sexuality in here. She's very clearly bisexual. I mean, she dated a woman earlier, and she died during the battle of when they were fighting Hela when she was still a Valkyrie. She said like that Jane was hot, Team Jane, and that she like kissed a girl's hand, and she also was eating grapes and didn't want to save Thor when he was naked. That was a lot of fun. So I can't wait to see what they do with that in the future of the MCU and just with her character in general, because again, I love Valkyrie, one of my favorite characters in the MCU. I think that is pretty much everything I wanted to talk about, spoiler filled. So there you have it, guys. I know most of the spoiler-filled things I talked about were negatives, but I had a really good time with this movie. I had a gigantic smile on my face from start to finish. It was an absolute blast. And for a movie like this, that is the most important thing. So have you guys seen Thor: Love and Thunder yet? At this point, I hope you have, because you just watched the spoiler section. If you're going to post a spoiler comment, please put a spoiler warning, because this is a mixed review, both spoiler-free and spoiler. But other than that, drop a comment. What do you think about the movie? If you enjoy this video, hit the like button. If you enjoy my content in general, subscribe to the notification bell to get notified when I post a video. I got more MCU stuff coming soon. I was going to originally do a ranking of all 30 MCU movies, or it was going to be 29 now. And then I realized, we're at 29. I'm going to wait until Black Panther 2 comes out, because that'll be an even 30, and then I'll do it. But I got other plans for MCU videos. I'm going to record one right after this, so stay tuned I'm going to have at least one or two more MCU videos coming soon. So stay tuned for that. I'll see you soon.